The asp, a symbol of divine royalty, sinks its fangs into the queen's flesh. To the Romans, this was the final desperate act of a defeated ruler. The end of Cleopatra. Her great ambition, her love affair with Mark Antony, her entire dynasty, all of it collapsing into dust as Octavian's forces march on Alexandria. This is the story we've all been told. A tragedy. A surrender. But what if they were wrong? What if this wasn't an ending, but a carefully orchestrated beginning? What if this moment wasn't an act of desperation, but an act of deification? This is the story of how Cleopatra's greatest prophecy wasn't about the future of Rome, but the crafting of her own eternal godhood. Because to understand Cleopatra, you have to understand that she was never just a queen. She was a goddess in waiting. To the Romans, Cleopatra was a foreign seductress, a political problem who had corrupted their great general, Mark Antony. But in Egypt, she was something far more profound. From a young age, Cleopatra wasn't just a political ruler, she was a divine figure. She didn't just worship the goddess Isis, she presented herself as Isis's living incarnation on earth. This wasn't just clever branding, it was a deeply ingrained part of her identity and her strategy for rule. In a world where divinity and power were inseparable, to be a god was the ultimate political statement. Ancient sources, including the Roman historian Plutarch, tell us that Cleopatra would frequently appear in public, dressed in the sacred robes of Isis. She adopted the title Nea Isis, or the New Isis, not just to appeal to her Egyptian subjects, but because she saw herself as the earthly vessel for this powerful deity. Isis was the goddess of motherhood, magic, and rebirth, the protector of the throne, and the one who could conquer death itself. By becoming Isis, Cleopatra was telling the world that she too held these powers. Her reign wasn't just a matter of political succession, it was a divine mandate. This divine association was a prophecy in itself. It was a promise that her rule was protected by the heavens and that her legacy, like that of the gods, would be eternal. When she gave birth to Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, the propaganda was clear. The living Isis had given birth to Horus, the divine heir destined to rule. Her children with Mark Antony, the twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and their younger brother Ptolemy Philadelphus, were named for the sun, the moon, and a dynasty of kings, tying her family to the cosmos itself. This wasn't just naming children, it was an attempt to write a cosmic destiny for her dynasty. But as the final war with Rome loomed, Cleopatra knew that her grandest performance was yet to come. She would have to prove she could conquer not just kingdoms, but death itself. A prophecy isn't always a whispered prediction. Sometimes it's a meticulously crafted plan, a story so powerful it bends reality to its will. One interpretation is that Cleopatra's final act was this kind of prophecy, a conscious orchestration of her own death to ensure her deification. The evidence for this isn't in lost scrolls, but in the political, religious, and symbolic choices she made in her final days. First, the political reality. After their defeat at the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra's situation was hopeless. Octavian, Rome's pragmatic and ruthless rising star, wasn't one to show mercy. For Cleopatra, capture meant humiliation. The ultimate prize for Octavian would be to parade the legendary Queen of Egypt through Rome in chains, a living trophy of his victory. Cleopatra knew this. Her entire life was a performance of power. To be paraded as a prisoner was a fate worse than death. It would unravel everything she'd built. Her suicide, therefore, wasn't a surrender to Octavian, but her final act of defiance against him. She chose her own exit, denying her enemy his ultimate prize. Second, the religious symbolism. Cleopatra's deep identification with Isis was the key to her final act. The Isis myth is all about death and resurrection. For the new Isis to simply die as a mortal prisoner was unthinkable. It's argued her death had to be a ritual, an event that mirrored the mythology she had woven around herself. Plutarch's account tells us that before she died, Cleopatra bathed and ordered a feast. Actions more like ritual purification than the panicked moves of a desperate woman. She was preparing not for an end, but for a transformation. This brings us to the most crucial piece of evidence, the method of her death. Now, the story we all know is the asp, brought to her in a basket of figs. But it's important to know that ancient sources offer other possibilities. Writers like Strabo and Cassius Dio suggested she might have used a poison ointment, or a sharp poison tool like a pin. Modern historians are still uncertain about the true cause of her death, but the story of the asp is the one that has endured, and for a very good reason. The snake in ancient Egypt was a symbol of divine royalty and protection. The rearing cobra, the uraeus, was the emblem on the pharaoh's crown. By choosing a death delivered by this sacred animal, a symbol of sovereignty and Isis herself, Cleopatra wasn't just killing herself. She was arguably performing her own apotheosis, declaring that she wasn't being conquered, but was transitioning into her true, divine form. This fusion of history, myth, and strategy is what makes the ancient world so fascinating. If you're enjoying this look at Cleopatra's final gambit for immortality, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. We challenge the stories you thought you knew every week. Let's go back to that sealed room in Alexandria, in August of 30 BC. Imagine the scene not as one of despair, but of sacred ritual. Cleopatra isn't a prisoner, she's a high priestess officiating her final ceremony. Her loyal handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, aren't just servants, they are acolytes. Outside, Octavian's soldiers are closing in, thinking they're about to capture a queen. They're wrong. The queen is already gone. According to Plutarch, when Octavian's men finally broke down the doors, they found a scene of serene, majestic death. Cleopatra lay on a golden couch, adorned in her royal robes. Iris was already dead at her feet, and Charmian, barely standing, was adjusting the crown on Cleopatra's head before she too collapsed.
One of Octavian's soldiers cried out angrily, "Was this well done of your lady, Charmian?" Her dying reply was, "Extremely well, and as became the descendant of so many kings."
This wasn't the aftermath of a chaotic suicide. This was a tableau, staged to perfection. The golden couch, the royal attire, the perfectly placed crown, it was all part of the performance. Cleopatra didn't just die. She composed her own death scene. The method, whether it was the fabled asp or a hidden poison, was the final, critical prop. As the toxin coursed through her veins, she wasn't succumbing to an enemy. She was embracing a divine instrument. The bite of the sacred serpent, or the prick of the poisoned needle, was a release, the moment the mortal queen shed her earthly vessel to become the eternal goddess. When Octavian arrived, he found he'd been outmaneuvered. He could capture her body, but her legacy had escaped him. He wanted a prisoner to parade through Rome. Instead, he was left with an icon. Plutarch says he was both frustrated and awed by her spirit. Cassius Dio even claims he called upon snake charmers from the Celi tribe to try and revive her, but it was too late. The prophecy, as she may have designed it, was complete. The mortal queen was dead, but Isis was eternal. In the end, Octavian got his triumph in Rome, but it was a hollow victory. He had an effigy of Cleopatra carried through the streets, and some accounts say it had an asp clinging to its arm, forever cementing the very story that guaranteed her immortality. He wanted to show Rome a defeated queen, but in doing so, he immortalized the image of a goddess who chose her own destiny. Cleopatra's final prophecy, in a way, was successful. She bet that her story, crafted with such care, would outlive the empire that defeated her, and she was right. Octavian, who became the mighty Emperor Augustus, is a figure in history books, but Cleopatra is a legend. She has inspired poets, playwrights, and artists for 2 millennia. Her name is synonymous with power, mystique, and divine beauty. She has achieved a cultural godhood that has far eclipsed the Roman emperor who saw her as just a political obstacle. She gambled that through a carefully managed death, she could become immortal. And by staging her final moments not as a defeat but as a divine ascension, she ensured that we would be telling her story, just as she intended, thousands of years later. So, the next time you think of Cleopatra's death, don't just picture a tragic surrender. Picture a final, brilliant act of prophecy. a queen, becoming a goddess, and securing her place in eternity. What do you believe? Was Cleopatra's suicide an act of desperation, or did she truly achieve her goal of becoming a god? Let me know in the comments below.